I'll build it for you. Yeah. And that's really a nice upsell we can do. We don't think about that sometimes, but a lot of these people, I have no idea what they have on their floor, especially sometimes the business owners. In some cases, they're somewhat checked out of the everyday process. They don't even know. And so we want to talk to usually the maintenance guy. You know, he's the one who knows everything that's going on, but usually they don't have good lists. Depreciation schedule is what a lot of times we'll find because they almost always have at least some form, and that will give us some idea of what we're dealing with, you know, total number of items. So that's just a sample depreciation schedule that I've got there in front of you. And so I thought we'd just talk for a second regarding this because there's some good things that you can do with the depreciation schedule, and we'll get into that a little bit later too. But as we glance through that list there, it should give you kind of a good idea. This is what a standard depreciation schedule looks like, but as most of you know, as you've seen them, perhaps your own or for companies you worked for, they vary all over, you know, from nice and clean to just awful. And so it all depends on the accountant and how much information the owners and the team are feeding to the accountant. And a lot of times you can't even understand what the equipment is because an accountant may be typing something in and they don't know what the equipment is, so they're just typing forklift. Well, for crying out loud, you got 30 forklifts. Which one is it? There's no way to know. So sometimes we're just flying blind on that. But I was just curious because depreciation schedules usually where we kind of fall back to gives us an idea. If they have an equipment list, that's even better. Especially if they have, you know, if they're large enough, they've developed an equipment list that has asset numbers, asset tags, then we can really, you know, dial in and figure out exactly how many pieces they have. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, and we'll reference that depreciation schedule there. But usually we want to get an idea of how many pieces. Most of us charge based on piece. There might be some other ways of doing that, but that's usually the safest way to get an idea of how much time you're going to spend on site. Okay, let's see if we can move through this here. So as we go into preparing for your site visit, we're going to talk a little bit more here about these different forms of list, and again, gathering as much information as possible. Where is the equipment located, as was mentioned, is one thing. If there's multiple locations, we have to know that, and that happens a lot. So be sure you ask those questions. Where is the equipment located? Is it all on one side? Is it inside? Is it outside? You know, those are pretty big deals depending on where you're working, and it seems simple, but if we don't know that stuff when we get on site, man, we're in a mess. And especially if it's, I know as one example, I had a job in Phoenix in August, and of course it was all outside. The way it looked, I thought a lot of it was going to be inside, but every single piece was outside, and there was no cloud coverage, and I was out there for 2 days straight in the Phoenix sun, and I didn't bring any sunscreen, so I was fried to a crisp. So, you know, learn from experience. But that's another thing too, as far as things that you'll have in your bag. And so that's something we wanted to mention. It seems basic and simple, but what kind of bag do we have that has those things that we need? Simple stuff like sunscreen, your PPE. A lot of times if you get into stuff with oil field work, they're going to want you to have to have PPE, and you have to have FR, fire resistant clothing. That's going to be required to even get on site. Sometimes they'll give it to you. I've done some jobs where they just hand it to you, and that's pretty nice. Other times you got to bring it, and FR gear isn't cheap, so but you need to make sure you have those things available to you, steel toe boots, just depending. But you don't know unless you ask. So you kind of have to get an idea from your client as far as what things are going on site, what you need to have with you if they require PPE. I almost always wear safety glasses just in general because it's just kind of silly not to. Some of these machines you're working around, who knows what could come flying off. So that's basic safety stuff, you know, loose clothing that could get caught in anything. I mean, we are working sometimes in tight corners, getting around machines, so just being careful with stuff like that. But having a bag, all of that, and that went through in our training. We covered a lot of that initially when you got your certifications, but just good things to keep in mind. And asking, you know, who really knows the value of the equipment, who's handling the repairs. So that's why it's nice to see if we can work with a maintenance guy. The owner sometimes will go with us, but generally, in a lot of scenarios, the owner has no clue about the equipment. Not to the extent that the maintenance guy does, or your lead technician on the floor. He's the one that's going to know the pieces, know what kind of maintenance has been done on them, have the records if we want to see them. Oftentimes they can tell us what they've done to it, and that's where it really gets into. You got a piece, but they added you know, on a vertical machining center, they've put $150,000 in tooling in the thing. Well, you're not going to know that unless somebody tells you in a lot of cases. And so your depreciation schedule is not going to have that stuff broken out. It's all going to be listed together or in different areas. So we just have to ask. So having that guy who works on the equipment is key, really, to helping in that scenario. So getting the depreciation schedule in Excel is one thing that's really nice. So you can see in this format that I gave you there, that's just a PDF version, but they can always export it into Excel. Sometimes you don't need to ask for it. If it's a big job, I almost always want to ask them for the Excel version because it just simplifies things so much. So if you can get something in Excel, then you're able to start reformatting, moving things around. And this is all, again, we're talking about preparing for the site visit. Because if you just have if you're, you can it when you're on the site visit. The problem is trying to identify things, and your guy on site's usually going to have it. And if you've done these, you know, sometimes you'll get on site with a depreciation schedule, and those guys will just stare at you like, I have no idea what this stuff is. Yet they're the people that work on the machines, but because of how it's been coded on here, they have no clue. So they can't even direct it to us. So sometimes we just have to fight through it, but if we can get a better list, then that can be huge. And especially if we have it in Excel format, if we can get that before we go on site, then we can even organize. And so we're going to show a couple of examples here. I'll wait since I have to go back there. We'll show a few examples of sorting and just give you some idea of how we can clean things up. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tom from Florida.
Yeah.
Some of the commodity checks that I've been doing lately, I've run into this same problem. So I've gotten in the habit of figuring out who's going to walk me through that inventory. 2 or 3 days before I show up, I send that individual the list that I have, explain to them in detail, and it's a 10-minute phone call.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm going to do, what my expectation is, and the last 3 deals that I went out on, they sent me a brand new list based upon
Perfect.
the guy I'm going to walk the floor with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect.
So having that 10-minute conversation 3 days before makes a big difference.
Yeah. Do any of you ever have them do the data collection for you? Yeah. Yeah, that's good. If they'll do it, yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. If you can get them to do it. You know, I think it was last year, one of the gentlemen was saying that, and maybe it was you, I don't know, but was saying that he always gets them to fill it out and to do the data collection on the front end for him. I don't specifically do that. If they'll do it, that's great. It's pretty awesome if you can do it, though. I mean, in most cases, it's another thing just like this. We just have to ask. Sometimes we just don't think to ask or don't know to ask. But if we ask them or say, hey, here's what I need to get this accomplished, then they're going to do it. And they'll get you, generate a list and give you all the equipment typed out. Or so you never know. But one guy said, you know, we're equipment appraisers. We're not data gatherers. So, you know, that's one thing to think about. Yeah.
The only caveat to that is how do you know the equipment is there? I used to be in the auction business, so we did a lot of appraisals on equipment, and we'd go out where somebody wanted an appraisal for a refund, and the piece didn't even exist.
Yeah.
And the bank was depending on us to make sure that that piece was actually sitting in somebody's yard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
The only caveat.
Yeah, it is. That's true. So there's lots of little things. You know, every job is different. There's no right way to do every single job. So we just have to do the best we can. But the more information we can get up front, the better. I thought we'd show, I'll just go ahead and do that now. I'll show a couple of examples here. And this, some of this is pretty basic, but we'll just go with the assumption that maybe, let's see, is it going to work? There it goes. Okay. Well, is it going to let me? Why does it do that? Is it because this thing's plugged in?
It might be. Let me just unplug it.
Yeah, let's do that for now. Okay.
Yeah,
There we go. Well, maybe it won't work. Well, we can skip past it if we can't get it to work. That's weird. I don't know. see if this thing's still working. Oh yeah, I gotta plug that in. Okay, we'll just roll without it. So technical problems there, but I was trying to show was when you get the item in Excel, do most of you use an Excel format, or have you before before you go on site? Do you sort the columns for information? So Excel's pretty easy for doing that, for sorting. I mean, there's a sort button when you go up to the top, but again, that sounds pretty basic, but man, it can save you a ton of time when you're on site. So if you can get a list in Excel format, then you can sort it by different types. And so sometimes they'll have a category for you, and I hate that that's not working because I want to show you a couple samples of what I had received. But depending on the format that they send it to you in, you can sort it by category. Now, I got a couple of equipment lists where they actually had it broken out. It was almost all the work was done for me. And like you were saying, you know, sometimes if they fill it out for you and they send it to you, then you've got all that data. It saves you work on the back end. And so that's why we're saying Excel can be super helpful for you if you can get it on the front end. If you can sort the columns, you can sort by make, model, if they've already got it in that format. On one of the examples, is it going to work? I don't know. Okay, that's fine. I'll let you. Yeah, everything was on there, but I guess it got closed out. Okay. Yeah, there was a couple of them. I guess it's moving slow, huh? Yeah. I don't. Not unless they bring it up. I mean, I I bid it per item. Oftentimes, you know, in some cases, we tell them, you know, here's our item charge and here's what the total cost is. In some cases, I would just say, here's the total cost. And depending on your client, you know, if it's the bank, they could care less. You know, if they accept you for a certain price, they're not really paying attention to how many items you've done, in my experience. Right, of what I'm going to bid it. But yeah, if it comes in less, so do it how you want. For me, if it comes in less, I bid it, I've taken the time, I'm not going to lower my fee. If they bring it up, okay, we might have a conversation over it. I'm not going to be a jerk about it, but I'm not going to offer to discount. That's just me personally. Yeah.
On this subject, just like to ask the group, how many folks bid the job just by the time? Like I never give them a number until they've given me the amount of assets, where it's going to be, and I tell them up front, I'm bidding this on time costs money, I'll bid it by time, and then they give me all the stuff, and then I just bid them a one lump number, which is obviously much larger than doing the individual piece. But how many people do it by time and not by individual item?
When you say by time, are you actually giving them billable hours, or are you giving them a flat rate at the
I'm
end?
giving them a flat rate based on what I see.
Flat rate.
Yeah. Yeah, and mine are almost always, I guess you could say, a flat rate, but it's based on number of items. So I will factor my time in depending on where it's located, I guess you could say. Or I may just raise my per item price, if it's, you know, depending on how much travel I have. I went to Spokane a few weeks ago, and stinking Spokane cost me $1,000 round trip to get in and out of there. It's just stupid. So some places are just expensive. If you're going anywhere in California, you know, your hotel costs are going to be higher, your travel costs are going to be higher. You're going to New York, you know, so depending on where I'm going, I may just raise my per item fee, and do it that way. But I guess I factor my time a little bit, but usually I just use my per item and then figure out how much I want to make on the job and bid it that way. Anybody have anything different? Yeah, so there's lots of different ways you can do it. I guess you just got to find a way that works for you, and you got to figure out what you want to make on it. There's always somebody that can possibly do it cheaper, so you can either discount fees and try and get the job, or just know what you need want to make and be willing to lose it if it doesn't work out. So everything's different. It's depends if you're, need work or not, how desperate you're going to be, or what you're going to put your cost at there too. But anyway, so those are just some ways. And again, I apologize we couldn't get that to work better, but that's what I was going to show, just some simple samples of sorting and how beneficial that can be when you sort it beforehand. But this is a nice part here too, as we kind of move on in performing your site visit, getting to know your end client. And so why this is so nice, once you've kind of prepared for the site visit, you've done as much work as you can to bid it, you've landed the job, now we're on site. And so what I always like to do when I get on site, and every job's a little bit different, but in most cases, if I can take some time to visit with the client, it saves me so much time. And you can find out so much information just by sitting down and having a cup of coffee with them. So rather than just kind of showing up and jumping straight into going through the equipment, I like to spend a little time and figure out some information. Specifically, having them explain what the purpose is for this. And we probably found a lot of that out on site, before we bid it, but not always. There's sometimes, and maybe you've experienced this, sometimes I get on site and what they had told us was completely different. Or because you're dealing with different parties, you've got a banker that's contacted you, you've sold the job to the banker. Well, now you're meeting with the actual, user, the company. Well, it's not a buy-sell scenario, it's a bankruptcy scenario. Well, they never said that. Why that got overlooked, who knows? We just had that happen recently, just a couple weeks ago with a sign company that we did. And the banker said, yeah, we just need this appraisal done, just need to know what everything's worth just for buy-sell. Okay, great, thought it was a pretty straight thing. Well, we get on site, the banker meets us out there, it's a bankruptcy. They've locked the doors, the owner's been kicked out. We're like, well, this isn't fair market value and continued use. Now we got to change our structure for what we're looking at. Now we're looking at, they specifically needed liquidation. So we wound up we did a fair market value for them too, because they wanted to know. But really the true figure after talking to them was orderly liquidation. Because they had some time, they were going to work through the process. They were hoping to get the owner to kind of come back in. So there was some working there, but we had to completely change from what we initially thought it was. So that's where sitting down, taking some time, visiting, what are they hoping to accomplish? What is the real need? What's the issue here? Why are they needing this appraisal in the first place? And really we can get a lot of information. Some questions like how long have they been in this field? Just getting them to talk and open up is good. What's their next plan? What are they hoping to accomplish with this appraisal? So when you start having that conversation, then it can really be helpful because now you can start to get into what kind of value are they looking for. So I'd like to kind of open it up too and get your ideas. Do you ever ask them specifically a number that they're looking for? Anybody?
I often do. Yeah. I just
Yeah.
want to know, what kind of surprise I'm going to have.
Yeah.
I'm a BV guy too, so I'm doing it from usually a different perspective.
Right. Yeah. No, that's okay. Nathan? Yeah. 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 Do you mind me putting you on the spot? Because you shook your head no. So, okay. Okay.
That's my question is, does that expose us to be appear biased if we're knowing what their target number? Because us from the auction company, it always starts with this. They want, this is what it's worth, and they're always trying to move you to
Yeah.
that. But we have to be independent and unbiased. I didn't know if it moved you to it. Depends on how you use that number. You wouldn't use it anyway. I guess it'd be an indicator of what you're missing, like you said. But I didn't know about the appearance to the customer.
I view it the same way as I do when I pick up the depreciation schedule and you look at the bottom and it's got a $12 million value. In a way, you've seen the value.
And that's kind of what we're getting at, because now each person has to make up their mind and figure out what's best for them. So we're not here to influence you. There's not a right way or wrong way per se, but certainly there's some safety in not asking, because then you can say, man, I don't have a clue what they're looking for. I wasn't shooting for any number. I gave them, X figure because that's what I came up with. Nothing wrong with that. Go ahead.
When I ask them the number, I tell them, I'm not going to use this as necessarily as part of my
Right.
appraisal. I just want to have an idea what you think it's worth
Yeah.
and why.
And that's kind of where I approach it too. Is I like to know. I like to have some idea of where they're shooting. And I just explained to them, look, we've got to do our due diligence. We have to be completely unbiased. So this is not a conversation of what do you want me to put the number at. This is a conversation to what are you looking, and here's where it can be beneficial if we have the depreciation schedule, as Nathan was saying. If we look at that, so if you take that example, if you look on the last page, what is the total on there? So that's their cost. So now we have some idea, because what can sometimes happen, we can say, you know, again, in this conversation, what are you guys looking to accomplish? What are you trying to do? Well, we're needing to get a business loan. We're trying to acquire another company, or we're trying to get more equipment. I need $5 million. What's your first reaction if you hear that from them based on their depreciation schedule? Yeah. Well, I hope you have a good line of credit, or you got a lot of money in the bank, because we're not going to come anywhere close to $5 million in most cases, simply because we know if that's what they paid for it, new or even used, when they bought it, it's going to be worth, just our best guesstimate, 50% of that, 50 to 60% of cost new. So while we don't know the exact number, we can get some idea. We can say, man, it's not going to come. And plus, when we take out the real estate, if that's listed on there, you know, you have to go through, take out the real estate and some of those items, the land, our number gets even smaller. We're just looking at the machinery and equipment. So, yeah, go ahead.
The thing I always ask them is, you know, I'm sure you probably, you got any comps for me? I'm always interested. Well, tell me
Yeah.
about other pieces that you bought, or that, who do I talk to, and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
Those things.
Yeah, that's good. Absolutely, Nathan.
And I've had scenarios where exactly like you're saying, the guy's like, oh, we need 5 million out of a 5 point. And he's like, oh, we haven't added 2018 yet. There's like 3 items still there.
Yeah.
It's just not even showing up. So you can't even, if you wouldn't have asked the question, you would have never known.
You would have known, yeah.
I like that, because we could actually frame that question and qualify to say it won't have any effect on mine, but I just want to make sure if it's way off. There's probably something missing. And
That's,
that actually incentivizes him. Well, let me tell you all about everything, and then you even get more information.
yeah.
And I've fought it 3, if not 4 times in court with them.
Yeah.
Really? I'm like, oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I have too. So,
It's all about framing.
Amber?
Depends on who you have taking you around to show you the equipment too, how much they know about it, because you just look at make, model, and serial number, and either they have it written off for parts, or they have way extra stuff on it, so that can make a huge difference. And you got 10 of those, and you don't know that it's got extra stuff, or that it's for parts, so that really changes the difference.
Yeah,
So
it
if
could.
you know that goal number that they're looking for, not that you're telling them, okay, I'm gonna meet that for you, but at least you know how far off you are one way or the other.
Now, on the flip side, it can cause perhaps a little anxiety sometimes if you know. So, as an example, just 2 weeks ago, did a job, manufacturing company. They had about $11 million on the depreciation schedule. He threw out a number of $8 million. So, right away, I know this isn't going to be good. Well, the appraisal came in. Now, of that 11 million, about 5 of it was real estate and land related, and real estate upgrades, all that junk. So you take all that out, now we're sitting at about 6 million of equipment. Well, the appraisal came in at about 3.3, so right where you would think it would, 50 to 60% of cost. So now a little anxiety on my end per se, because now I'm going to turn it in. I know what he was hoping, or some number he's trying to get. I don't know what he's going to say, but it doesn't really matter. To your point, that's unbiased. I can't do anything about it, but it does give you a little anxiety. You're like, great, they're not going to be happy, and I'm going to have to deal with, and then they're going to criticize every line item, and so that's just part of it, though.
The other thing is, I think your point too is find out why in the world you're doing this. I do a lot of work for divorces and
Mm-hmm.
other kind of fights, where you're on the other side where the guy's telling you this $10 million worth of equipment's really worth 500,000 because the whole business is going to go upside
Yeah.
down. And so you got the pushes the other direction.
Yeah, that's true. And thinking about getting back to our value scenarios, so when we're talking order liquidation, fair market value and continued use can make all the difference in the world in giving them more money. So fair market value and continued use, man, that really allows us to kind of do whatever we want. You can take all their installation costs and you can help factor some of that in. We're saying this business is good, it's going to keep going. So you BV guys know that, there's a lot of wiggle room in that. Sometimes it's almost an unrealistic number, but that's it allows you to get more value there. So if that's the case, then we have to make sure our value scenario is the right one, and we're not giving them just fair market value as if it's selling. But man, you got all this. There is a lot of goodwill here that's been put into this business, and so you can capture some of that. So anyway, it's good just to kind of verify all those things, and that's where just sitting down, talking with them, working through all of this. Hopefully you've done some of that on the front end, so you're not surprised. But when you get on site, we've had some cases where we get on site, we couldn't get good data beforehand, but we at least had the depreciation schedule. We get on, we ask them, do you have a better list? And the owner said, you know what, let's go find out. So he takes us back, we go to the maintenance department, and the guy's like, oh yeah, I've been asset tagging everything the last year. So he prints out this beautiful list that has every asset tagged. All the machines were tagged with the number. So the numbers were in order. I'd go to each machine and check it off. They had the serial number. I wasn't doing any data collection. I was taking my pictures, marking it off, and just asking some questions and filling in the blanks. But that was great. So you never know unless you ask to that point. So try to get as much information and try to get them to give you whatever information you need. We just ask them for. Yeah.
We actually have a pre-assessment check sheet that we send to them.
Awesome.
What are the locations? Who's their guy going to be? What's his phone number? And like Tom, we called them ahead of time.
Yeah.
Any repairs that have been done, anything that you've done, can you have the receipts for that? We actually have the whole check-off list and work with them a day or two before we get there. So a lot of the work is done and we have an idea before we get there.
Yeah, that's great.
And the appreciation schedule sits to us ahead of time.
Yeah.
It saves an awful lot of time.
Yeah. I hate working off the depreciation schedule on site. If I don't have to, if I can get a better list, I sometimes you just have no choice, but it's such a pain because nothing's in order, nothing makes sense. It's just a beating to work off that appreciation schedule. So.
For both at the onset of it, the depreciation schedule and an equipment list, knowing it's coming from two different sources.
Yeah.
It's going to give you the depreciation schedule. And there might be some extra columns in there that can help you, or hidden columns that you can unhide and they'll help you. And then you get the equipment list, which comes from the equipment manager, which has the real stuff.
Yeah.
So you get both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
That's for both as if you require it.
And I love that too because it's funny how sometimes those hidden columns, unhide those columns, you might find some really good information. Sometimes they hide them thinking you won't know, but I love the depreciation schedule getting that cost again because again you got a sanity check. Well, they paid $600,000 for it. It's not going to be worth $1 million now. It's going to depreciate. Nathan.
Well, the other option of that is let's say they bought the pieces in auction environments, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
There could be scenarios that
Yeah.
it has a multiplier against what the depreciation.
Yeah. And that happens quite frequently, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Some of these guys, they go to Purple Wave and they buy all their stuff in crap condition and because they've got their own maintenance team, those guys love getting stuff cheap and they work on it and fix it up. Now the thing's actually worth quite a bit of money because they bought it and fixed it up. So that is good. We have to take all that into consideration. And again, having your maintenance guy there makes all the difference because they know what they've done to it. They know what they've spent on it. And you can just ask them, those questions and ask them what it's worth. I want them to tell me, especially the guys that are working on it all the time. They're buying the stuff. What do you think it's worth? Doesn't mean I'm going to go with their number, but it's kind of a great sanity check, to know if I'm close. Yeah.
Great source we have found. We don't do machinery equipment numbers, but one thing that we've used is what they've insured for. Because usually they've got a pretty good idea of what
That's true. Yeah.
and they're listing it. Usually I can get a list from them. There's all my equipment. There's my insurance. This is what I gave the agent. And then we give it to somebody like you to give us the real number.
Yeah. That's interesting. I've never actually done that. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've had guys tell me, you look at their depreciation schedule, it's all age stuff, but
Yeah.
it's construction stuff, so it's value.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's another thing too, because sometimes, sometimes you have to reassure the client too, because you go on site, they don't always think we know anything, so sometimes your construction equipment can look like crap, but it's still worth a ton of money. All construction equipment looks day one they take it on the job site, it looks terrible. You know, it gets beat up, gets dirt all over it. So I have a lot of guys that'll, I'm so sorry, stuff's not cleaned up. I'm like, I don't care about that. You know, you don't need to have it washed and cleaned up for me. If it's out in the field, if it's working and running, that tells me half of what I need to know. You know, this item's in good working condition, if they've got maintenance records on it. The fact that it doesn't look great, that has some bearing, but you know, it's not huge. So
Just a side note, I will tell you that equipment that's working close will bring more value in an auction than it's all made up, because what are you hiding?
mm,
And, you know, guys will bring, they'll clean it up, they'll put new stuff on it, clean up the seat, put glass in it, and it looks great, but if a piece comes across and it's working close, it'll oftentimes bring more
that's
value.
interesting.
It looks like
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot to be said for a well-oiled machine that's just running.
couldn't enough and
Yeah, that's right. Good point. All right, so we'll kind of jump in now to performing the site visit, moving around the job site. So there's lots of different ways, and we can kind of, if you have ideas here, please share them. When I go on site, I don't like to jump around. And on the depreciation schedule, if I've used that, you know, we've put check marks. But if I say, you know, hey, take me to this item, again, if you're dealing with 10 items, fine. You know, take me to item number one, and they'll take you over there. But if you're dealing with 150 items, to say, okay, take me to item number one, well, you're walking all the way over here on the plan. All right, item number two, well, that one's way back over here. Well, you've passed by 50 machines doing that. So that sounds maybe simple, but I always like to start in the corner. So if all I have to work off of is the depreciation schedule, I'm making them find it. So, okay, we're going to start here at this machine. Now tell me where that's at on your list. I mean, this is their equipment, you know, figure it out. And because I want to mark it, make sure that I've captured all the equipment, but I make them figure it out and show me where it's at. I'm not going to jump around from machine to machine. Then you're going to miss stuff. It's so easy to miss things. But if you start in a corner, just work your way around, capture everything in a little area, and keep working around, and then mark it off on your list, find it on there. Everything just comes together so much nicer. So this is one where it's nice to have an assistant on certain jobs. Doesn't always work. How many of you, do any of you ever take an assistant with you? Or most? Yeah, you bring somebody? Yeah, good. All the time, good, awesome. What's the benefit to you? What? Good.
if it's a big job, 50 plus items, and I have my list, I can just document everything we're looking at, so we're not walking from one end of the factory to the other.
Good. Yeah.
Really good for those.
Yeah. Amber, you want to? Amber is my wife, by the way. But you want to share just what you do when I take you on jobs?
Well, usually I do, I'm checking the list and making sure everything is in order there, make sure you have the same item number for what's listed on the list for your item
Mm-hmm.
for the appraisal. But then I'll ask, when he's busy taking pictures and things, I'll be talking with the guy and asking him what this equipment is and what it does, and sometimes I'll play really dumb and just, so how old is this? You know, so it could be 1965, it could be 2005. I'll, you know, let him tell me so that while you're writing things down, he's able to jot things down that the guys tell me. So he's going to be more willing to tell me, the assistant, a lot of different things if I seem interested in it, where he expects him to know those things already, when he doesn't. So while I'm busy asking the questions and getting answers, he's busy writing it down, but it looks like he's still writing down the serial number.
I'm telling somebody I don't know anything about your piece of equipment. But if I can avoid that, you know, because they just assume you know a lot. Sometimes I think they assume we're certified mechanics for the specific equipment that they have in their shop, which wouldn't even be possible for us to be certified in all the different types of equipment that we work on or to be mechanics for it. We don't have a clue about some of this stuff. We have experience, we've seen it, we know general information depending on your background, but it would be impossible for us to know everything about every piece of equipment we're going to see on site. So having an assistant can be huge, and just carrying conversation on while you're gathering data. Like she said, sometimes she plays dumb. She gets them to talk about things. I don't know if that's sexist, but a female assistant is awesome sometimes, because a lot of these guys, they're just going to up to to a lady that's in the room, you know, be nice to her, and you know, she shows an interest in their equipment, and they just want to talk about it. So that helps. Nathan, you had your hand up.
Just gonna comment on the, you know, we don't know everything. I remember a scenario where I was doing a highway pouring company,
Yeah, so don't pretend to be something we're not. You know, don't try and pull wool over their eyes. That's a good point. It'll get us in hot water. But I just tell them, you know, sometimes, and it depends on who you're dealing with. But I just tell them, look, you're the expert on the equipment. That's the best thing to say. You're the expert. Tell me. I'm an expert in finding values on this, but you know your baby. Tell me about your baby, what you've done to it, and just get them to open up. And that's the best way. But having an assistant just helps that. It doesn't work in every scenario. Sometimes it's not cost prohibitive to bring an assistant, but if it's a big job, it's definitely worth it. It's also nice for checking off. So I have the equipment list. I kind of do it opposite from what you were saying. I like to take the photos, and then she'll be checking off or putting a number on the list that's corresponding to mine. I'm taking data down too, and then she's writing down the number that corresponds with mine. So there's lots of different ways, but Nathan. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah, that's great. So anyway, just an idea. You know, think about it again, depending on your job and who you have assisting. Next slide. So where we're at. Yeah, collecting the data. So giving data collection form to the client, or at least telling them what we need. So as you know, when we go to each piece, now some items you don't really need to ask a lot of questions. You know, if it's a general welder, for me, I'm not going to dig in deep on it. You know, I know the thing's worth, you know, 1,500, 2,500 used on a lot of these welders, depending on what it is. But some items we're gathering, we can do them pretty quick and move on to the next one. But when you get into your big ticket items, being upfront with them, tell them this is kind of what I need to know about your big items. I need to know, you know, obviously when it was manufactured, if possible. Half the time, the manufacturing date is not on these pieces of equipment. You can find the serial number, but finding a date on most of them, if you can interpret it out of the serial number, you know, have fun. You know, sometimes you can do research online and figure it out, but you just wind up wasting your time. But they usually know or have some idea, or they can tell you when they bought it. It might be on the depreciation schedule. They may have bought it used though, but you know, that kind of information, what have they done to it? All those things we've already mentioned, but getting more data out of them about have they made it needs to be done. So I kind of run through that data collection form with them up front and say, when we go to each piece, this is kind of the information I'm needing. And then as we go, I don't have to keep asking those same questions for every piece. We'll just start spitting information out, you know, as we go to each item. And I may have to remind them about certain things, especially on big ticket items, to try and figure out. And if we know they're trying to get a big number, then I'm really going to be pulling, what have you done to this? Why do you, you know, they say, well, I think it's worth this much. Why? What have you done to this thing? Why do you feel it's worth twice what it should be worth? You know, and maybe there's something that we're missing, and just get them to feed you as much information as possible. But that way they kind of have an idea of what we're needing for each item. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you get a lot of those where they'll say, "Oh, it's just a parts machine," you know, and we can throw it in. I mean, it still has some value for scrap or whatever, but you know, we usually throw it in ancillary and support. So, yeah, it just depends every scenario. But the more data they can give us, the better. Sometimes if I'm trying to hit, you know, we've quoted them, you know, 150 items or whatever, then I'm going to pull those. If I'm running short on stuff, I'm going to say, okay, well, that was one of your items. I'm doing it. I'm putting it as a line item, and I'm putting it in scrap condition. I'm going to still throw the value at it, but at least I'm getting my line items there that I told them that I was. So sometimes that's another way of, if it was mentioned earlier about, you know, we bid it at a certain number of items, but we only got X number of items when we were on site. I'm going to grab small stuff when I'm on site. So usually you get a feel for it as you start walking around if I'm going to be hitting my number or not, or if everything's matching up. And if it's not, I'll be grabbing small items. I'll be grabbing some of those, you know, little drill presses that normally we wouldn't mess with, but I'm going to list them to get my line item count where it needs to be, and ultimately to give them what they paid for. So. so usually we'll tell them, that's the advantage of kind of giving them a line item charge. In our contract, sometimes, they don't always do this, but sometimes we'll phrase it where, it's X number, or here's your price, and then we'll say if it goes over 150 items, it's X number of dollars per item. Some of you may do that, and that protects you. So if you're in a scenario where you think it's going to go high, then definitely you want to have some caveat there to protect you. There's a lot of scenarios where you can just upsell it too. It's you get on site and you bid it at a certain amount. You can say, man, we're only capturing 100 items, but we're seeing 150 items here that, really we should be valuing because that's going to help you get to this you want to get to. Yeah, let's do 150. Sometimes that requires you to go back to the banker. They have to do it. But sometimes with more money in your pocket, you're already there. Grab the machines and do the research on them. And you can make, extra cash that way too. So be open to those, different ways of upselling while you're there. There's a lot of things you can do, or even, as was mentioned, different asset, tagging options or different if you want to. So, okay, so on here we have large scale, multiple component equipment. A lot of things are pretty straightforward when we go on site. We got the make and the model, serial. We can look them up. We can call somebody, get some information about it. But sometimes you get into large scale equipment. So I'll give you an example. There was a custom wood products company that we did, and they had a machine. It was called a super fishy wood finishing system, and I'd never seen anything like it. It spread the better length of a football field, this piece of equipment. Now, obviously, it's components, so there's a bunch of different machines that make up ultimately this one machine. I had no idea what I was looking at, but thankfully, I had a great maintenance guy, and I was like, man, tell me about this thing. I don't know what you've got going here. He's like, he goes, this is my baby. So he'd been working on that thing for 2 years. Well, they had built it in-house. There's stuff like it in the market there, but you're not going to find a copy of the thing. It just doesn't exist. So all basically custom, but what it consisted of, and I wrote it down here, he had a scuff sander, staging conveyor, dust brush and collector, infrared scanner for the paint booth, paint finishing system, a reclaiming system, multiple ovens consisting of a 50,000 and 100,000 BTUs, custom cycle table with hydraulic scissor lift tables and rollers, things go up and down. So basically it was for cabinets. So they would move the wood through, and it would, from step one, it would just take this piece of wood through and finish the thing and spit it out at the end all ready to go. It was dried and ready to be packaged and put together. It was an awesome piece of machinery, but how are you going to value that thing? So I really just had him kind of break it out. I had him take me to each component, and then ultimately I just asked him, so how much money have you put in this thing? I was floored when he told me, he goes, we spent about 150,000. I said, you got to be kidding me. He's like, no. I mean, this thing looks, I would have figured $1 million, for all the components of this thing, but nothing was really that complicated. It was all really pretty basic stuff that he had put together and made this incredible machine. So now you got labor on there. There's a ton of money in that, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. We were doing fair market value and continued use, so it did allow us to kind of up the value a little bit, factoring some of that in, and just the fact that it's in place and working and, would have some value to somebody. But it was crazy. So then he starts to tell me, he goes, there are some other companies out there that manufacture similar things. You'd probably sell this thing for around 300,000 if I put it on the market. I was like, awesome. So I write that down because I know I'm going to go back. I'm going to do the best I can. But at the end of the day, I could not find anything. I couldn't find anybody to talk to. There was nothing anywhere. So, I wound up kind of looking at the different components of it, and he seemed to be spot on when you break out the components. So I wound up going with his figure. What else are you going to do? And who's going to disprove it at that point? There's nothing in the market to disprove you. So, he's the expert on it. He knows what it's worth. So I went with his figure. So everything's different, but the more information you can get from them, sometimes they'll help you on the back end. Because if I hadn't asked those questions, I would have had no idea. And I might have wound up going with my gut on the thing and breaking it out and saying, man, I think the thing's worth $1 million. Well, I'm way off. I don't know what I'm talking about. So, just asking those questions helps a lot. So don't be afraid just to get them to break it out. It's their baby. Let them tell you information. And this last point on here, Excel-based printout tells you quickly what's been missed. So as I've been performing the site visit, it's always nice if you have some form. If it's a depreciation schedule, it's a little harder. But if you've had something in Excel that you've printed out and it's all organized either by category you have a little spot in there. So usually I'll have a list, and if Amber's helping with me, she's checking them off, and she's putting like number 1 by each item, number 2, number 3. Now at the end, when we get close, we can go down and we can say, all right, here's the items we're missing. And then we go through some of them, they say, man, that thing's been gone for years. Great, no problem, we cross it off. Oh yeah, we missed that one, it was over here. And we go back. But you've narrowed your field, now you can at the end of the job jump around to those few items that you missed. But if you don't have some sheet that you're checking off on, then you're going to be lost. You're going to assume you captured everything, maybe you didn't. It depends. If it's, for me, if it's kind of a buy-sell scenario, I know the banker could care less, so they're probably not even looking at a report anyway, so I don't. I just mark it off and don't include it. If it's litigation or divorce, yeah, you bet. I'm going to include everything that they listed and say was not available for viewing, could not value item. I'm going to put notes in there so that when they call me up on the stand. Exactly. That's what happened. Or it's in that shipping container that he wouldn't unlock, when you went on site. I've had that so many times. Yeah, so anyway, that's a good question. So it just depends on the scenario and maybe what the client wants. But usually in most cases, I don't worry with it. I just cross it off and move on. So, okay, very good. Let's see here. So let's keep moving on here. I think the last slide in this section was just on photographs. This is super simple, but you may have seen other appraisals. I've seen a lot of appraisals, and it amazes me how often sometimes the pictures are just junk. So take good pictures. If you include them in your report, it's not a USBAP requirement, but a lot of us do it anyway. Just because it looks nice, it adds a little flair to the report. There's different ways to put the pictures in there. Everybody kind of has a different style that they like, but in whatever case, not so much for the report, but take good pictures for when you get back to the office. Because if you don't, or if your pictures are blurry, man, it's going to be such a pain if you didn't capture that serial number right, or it just makes all the difference in the world. Nathan?
So, I'm going to tell myself here for a minute. Chris used to work with me at the other company. I had the $1,200 camera. I was out on site shooting the photo and everything else like that. And I got back and my photos were blurry. Chris always had such fantastic photos. Just amazing photos. And I asked him a secret, and he said, I use my iPhone. Completely switched over to iPhone. I've never had a problem again.
Yeah. That's true. I go back and forth. Some scenarios it depends. How many of you use like an SLR or an iPhone? What do you like? iPhone?
I was a camera. I bought it first thing when I started all
Yeah.
this stuff, and I said, hell, it's a lot easier with this iPhone. Just transferring the pictures, I have a difficult time.
Yeah.
Nathan doesn't tell any secrets at all. But set it up, what I do is set it up to where it burns a number. I don't care if it's the time or a number or something, some identifiable numbers. When you're doing the data collection sheet or index card or however you do it, put that number that's on the picture there, because you might have 4 D16 crawler tractors, you don't know which one's which. Well, you've got a number to reference
Yeah.
to your card when you're putting it all together.
Yeah.
We even built an app to burn the number on it at one point in time. And it's still on iTunes if you guys really want it. But
Yeah.
since then, it's just a matter of if you take all 5 or 6 photos of the same piece, just really, really dial it in. It's much better.
Yeah. Yep. So, again, this sounds simple, but you got to figure out what works for you when you're moving around site. Now the disadvantage with using your phone, now phones are $1,200. It's just stupid what they cost. So you take your phone on site, make sure you have a decent case on it. Otherwise you're going to drop it. $1,200 gone. So, I do use, sometimes I have a digital camera that I use because I can just hang it around my neck, and it takes pretty good pictures. iPhone takes way better pictures. It just does. But having something just hanging from your neck, I would still like to find something. I'm sure there's something out there that I could hang my iPhone from my neck. I think that would be great because that gives me a free hand. When I'm using my iPhone, I always feel like I've got, awkwardness, and I'm afraid I'm going to drop it because it's just, but with something on my neck, I can just let it hang and then pick it up when I need it. Nathan?
I'm going to ask a test question here with the group.
Mm-hmm. That's a good idea.
I'm talking about true, we're running video.
You just have to figure out how to mount it. You can get the chest mount, or you can wear a hard hat, mount it on your head.
How do I get the data? How do I get a frame of picture transfer?
No, I mean, in conjuncture with. I'm talking about
So,
it as a backup almost.
so it's actually a really good idea, and it may not be that you have to use it in every scenario, but I've thought pretty heavily about using that, especially if you're going into a litigation scenario. Just 2 weeks ago, I was on a job just here in Texas. It was a small job, but it's a litigation deal. And I thought, man, I wish I had something on me that was recording this, because the guy hated us being on site, but it was court ordered. We had to be there. And he's off to the side recording everything I'm doing. And that's a little uneasy feeling, because you're like, man, if I touch anything wrong on this equipment, he's going to say, well, you broke such and such. So I'm like trying not to touch anything. I'm just standing back taking pictures, because he's capturing everything on film. I thought, man, in this scenario, if I had something, if I had a GoPro, or if I was recording this, then nobody could ever come back and say I messed something up. I've got it all on tape. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it is. Yeah, there's a lot of things, but GoPro's a nice business write-off. You get a cool camera too. Anyway, but that kind of opens the door too to some other things you have to think about. It's a little off topic, but as far as scenarios you can get yourself into, so probably 4 years ago, it was a litigation deal that we were doing, and I was still fairly new, a little inexperienced on some of the site visits and dealing with guys. Well, the client wanted to pick me up from the airport. Okay, that's fine. So he picks me up from the airport. Well, we're headed to court. The job had already been done. We're headed to court. So he picked me up for the court. That means he's also my ride back to the airport. Now, this guy, he was, I don't know, he looked like a mafia guy. I know he wasn't, but that's the feeling you get when I was with this guy. And man, he was kind of intimidating. And so it was all fine when we going to the airport. I mean, to the bad. He's right back to the airport. And funny enough, thankfully it went good, but he texts me, he's like, hey, I need to make a stop off over somewhere. On the way back to the airport, I'm like, oh crap, we're going through a terrible part of town. He pulls into some company and he gets out and meets some guy and they trade packages. I'm like, I'm sure it was all legit, but your mind starts going, man, what am I getting myself into? So after that, I always get my own transportation. I don't ride with anybody anywhere, unless it's one of my fellow members or I know them. But yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, my brother-in-law was being hauled around by the wife and the husband. They're getting divorced, and he tried to make small talk and talk about awkward. So, no, I mean sometimes it's okay. You might ride with a client to go capture a piece or two, but generally speaking, I get my own transportation. I don't want awkward scenarios and awkward conversations. Every job's different, but just you have to think about some of those things. So, okay, let's move on. Compiling your data, contacting your sources. So this kind of gets into again. Oh, sorry. Let's move it. So this is where your pre-site visit really pays off. We've covered some of this already, but again, if you've done things in Excel, there's no need to re-enter. And this is where I had some stuff I was going to show you, but we can't get it to work. So, but the whole point was on some jobs, if I've got a lot of items, I've got everything prepped beforehand. If I've got that Excel-based list that has the make, the model, the serial number, the VIN numbers, it's all entered. So when I get back to the office, I'm not having to retype all that. And I'm sure a lot of you in that scenario, some jobs you don't have a choice. You're sitting there typing, all this equipment in. Whether you're using Report Writer or you're typing it into Excel, either way, you're stuck having to nature of the job in some cases, but if we can prevent that, the more information we can get up front, if we can get it in Excel, then you get back to the office, and then you can spend your time doing what we're really supposed to be, which is appraising the equipment, not entering data. So it's just a waste of time if we can avoid it. So that's, again, where, that pre-site visit work really pays off. If you get all that information in Excel, then you can sort it. Now here's another thing that you can do too. Sort these rows and columns, and then you can sort by make. And so, as one example, I was going to show you again, but as one example that we did, it was for a company, and they did plastic extrusion machinery. And we were talking about this last night in a different company. Nathan had a nice example of some sex toys that was on one of his jobs. Plastic extrusion. So, some jobs are strange. Mine was much cleaner. But anyway, so they had all of this equipment. Well, they had lines of this extrusion equipment. Every line was pretty much the same stuff. There was some variances, but all the lines were the same. Well, I'm capturing everything, in the order as I go around. Well, now having it all in Excel, I was able to resort it. So I sorted it by make and model and year. And then when I called my guys for comps, I had everything right there. So I knew I'm talking to this guy in RM manufacturing. Hey, I've got 3 machines of yours that I need to get information on. So rather than if I'm just working down my list one item at a time, I do it and I get down like, man, I got to call that guy back and get more information on a different item that he manufactures. So simple stuff, right? But it saves a lot of time on the back end. If you can sort it, you can say, okay, I need to talk to somebody about these items. These are all the same items, maybe a different model number, but let's get as much information from them as we can. It's a huge help. So just sorting data makes all the difference in the world. And then it kind of gives you an idea too. What's nice is once you do that and you start setting your values, and you've got, let's say 10 of the same item, they may not all be the same value, but if you're doing it that way rather than doing them individually, now you kind of have that sanity check. So you might make some adjustments based on condition or year if the years are different in your values, but you can look at them all right there next to each other as opposed to out of order. Because I don't know if you've done this. Sometimes I've done it in the past where you value them, and then you get to the end of it, and I've even turned in a report, and they said, now, why is your value so different on this item as it was on this item? They're the same thing. I don't know. I found different comps, I guess, but because I didn't compare them, I didn't sort it and match them up. Such an easy thing to catch, but you just overlook it sometimes when you're doing a lot of items, or you forget that you even did that item, and yet you had one up top. Could have saved you, 20 minutes of research time if you had just looked at the one you'd already done. So sort them out makes a huge difference. Nathan? Yeah, exactly. Yep, makes a huge difference. So, yeah, that's so true. And inner formulas too. I, you may not know a lot about Excel. Some of you probably are gurus on it. So, but there's easy ways to enter formulas. Just hit the equal sign in a box, and then you can click sum, and then select the columns that you want to add up, and hit enter. And there's some easy YouTube videos that'll show you how to do that if you're not familiar with it. But that's a quick way too of adding everything up, and Excel is great for that. It does the math for you. You can do percentages, help you find your OLB, make adjustments from there. So just learning to use Excel, it is amazing what it can do for you and the time it can save you if you get to know it. Where's Dan Hall? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. I think it should be pretty easy, and I'll mention it today, and you'll know that we want that. But yeah, you know, report writer is nice in a lot of ways. It does sit out nice reports and just go through. So I use report writer every time, but like you said, I use Excel, but I don't enter my data into report writer in most cases, just because it's a bigger job. I've got all Excel. I'm not going to re-enter it into report writer. It's just a waste of time. So I'll take, I'll enter all the report stuff into report writer, spit my report out, and then I move my Excel document over and attach it in. You know, all cleaned up. So whatever works for you, but that's a nice thing, you know, with Excel. Don't retype your data if you've already got it in Excel. But if you type everything into report writer, it'll kick it out, but you just have to change the format. So either way, figure out what works for you. All right, let's keep going here. So
I wrote it for 500 people across the globe. You know, Australia, Africa, Europe, and so I had to keep it very simplistic. And with the idea that smart guys like in this room would come in and tweak it as he is having that done, and that's how it should be. But it does probably need some tweaking and updates in the last 6
Well,
years.
there's no doubt, John, it's fantastic, because it has all the disclaimers and everything we do, it's just the format has never
Yeah.
been updated for probably what,
That
maybe 10 years?
Well, there's a guy we talked to about it. You might want to.
We're tagging
Up-
report
updated.
writer, we loved report writer, which was probably great 10 years ago, but it needs to be updated to DocX and current, because it takes a half a day to actually update all the spaces and everything that
Yeah.
that came across incorrect when you did that, because you don't send it in rich text format, that's just not used anymore.
Yeah.
That's a mess. So everyone else has kind of built their own templates, but they've spent days and days and days re-entering, when we could take all this good work, update it once, and then we would all have current stuff to work with.
Yeah.
does anybody use an electronic format when they're on site or entering their data? Or does everybody use like pen and paper to jot notes now?
I think an iPad.
You take an iPad, so you're typing stuff in?
Nathan, you use an iPad to do data collection?
You want to hear the horror story of the first one?
Go for it.
8-hour day, 120-degree site visit, you know, dying on the vine. Last piece of equipment, I drop my tablet. It lands on the power button, mashes the power button in, all data gone.
So,
First time I tried. Fortunately, I had a guy with me as a backup,
Yeah.
so I get to tell the story.
First time I tried, first time I cried.
But now, I absolutely have my tablet on me. I'll suggest, if you do it, one of two things. There is a company that makes a vest, Scotty vest, spelled Scott E vest, that actually has a tablet holder pocket, which is fantastic if you have to climb a ladder or something like that. Another option is the military option, which is what's called a, I think it's a yukata bag or a Ugando bag or something like that, which is like a hip bag that can actually hold the tablet as well.
You know what we found is, like for the Surface Pro, I do all my work now in the cloud, so if you have an internet connection, so in case this does grenade, I still have a cloud backup.
That was my format at the very beginning too. I was working off an internet-based problem, but that didn't do you very good 2 miles back on a mine.
That's true.
yeah, if you've got internet coverage, or if you have cellular coverage on your tablet, that can solve that, because it's uploading constantly.
Yeah, if you're out of internet, that's not gonna help.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, I would say you are 50-50 on whether you're actually gonna have coverage inside of a steel building or inside of a mine or inside of
That's true.
you know, if you're in a doctor's office, you're cool, but
I love the idea of entering it electronically when and so that's just me. I use a clipboard still. I've got my data collection sheets. I just fill them out, jot down what I need. I don't enter, if I've already got the serial number on the list they gave me, I'm not going to write the thing down again. I'm going to take a picture of it. So
yeah.
save time on basic stuff like that. Don't
You know, I just ordered from Microsoft, and I don't know how it would work, but it's a mouse on the back of the computer tablet, and it's a hand piece.
Oh, yeah.
Piece
I
like
had
that
that
car
here when I dropped
assisted.
it.
Yeah.
Did you? And it still came out.
Yeah. But you know,
I was walking exhausted, trying to swing at my arm, and
the same thing could happen to your camera, I suppose, too. I've never had it happen. I've never lost all my pictures, but there's always that possibility. So it is what it is, but we just find ways to keep it as safe as you can, your data. Okay, we'll move on. We're running out of time here. Contacting your sources, gathering your values, not always going to find comps. So, you know, some guys really stress over that. My thinking is don't stress over it. Do the best you can to find the information you can. If we've done our work on site and we've gathered as much data, if we've asked them for information, sometimes, you know, we have that cost approach. Fall back on the cost approach. Don't spend 3 hours on one item, you know, killing yourself. You're not going to make any money on the job. So, you know, do the best you can to find the comps. Make the phone calls. Some people don't like making phone calls, you know, or they're maybe intimidated by it, but you know, you just make the call. Most people I've found are happy to give you information on it. I have not really found, maybe a handful of scenarios in the years where somebody was like real hesitant and was kind of being a jerk about giving me information. And I just take the honest approach. I just say, hey, I've got a scenario here. We're working with our client and we're having to determine how much this stuff is worth. In some cases, you know, depending on the equipment, they sold it to them. And they say, well, what is it? It's this such and such. I've had multiple scenarios where they'll say, oh, yeah, that's Bob. Yeah, we sold that to him. Well, here's what they paid for it. And here's what this stuff's going for now. You know, we don't really sell it used, but I know what it goes for. Just get them talking. Most of these guys will talk and just be upfront with them. I always kind of start off, this is just me, but I always tell them, look, I don't want to waste your time. I want to let you know up front, I'm not in the market to buy this machine. Because a lot of times you'll see them for sale, and they may say, you know, call for a price. So I'm going to call them, but I just reassure them I'm not looking to purchase this. I don't want to mislead you in any way. Here's my situation. Here's what I need help with. And they're like, oh, yeah, no problem. Here's what it is. Now, sometimes you'll get into scenarios where they'll say, well, I don't know. I can't give you an idea on that. I mean, it could be thousands of dollars in difference. I don't care. Give me the ballpark. You know, and sometimes I just have to tell them that. You know, sometimes they'll get worried over, you know, $5,000 difference in a machine because of components. When I'm dealing with a $300,000 machine, I don't really care about $5,000. So give me the ballpark. You know, everybody's different. Get as much details as you want, you know, but for me in some scenarios, I just want the ballpark. Give me some idea, because on some pieces I'm going up to, I don't have a clue if the thing's worth 5,000 or 600,000. I don't know anything about it. So give me that range. And if he says, well, you know, it's going to fluctuate between, you know, 500 and 550,000 depending on your options. Awesome. At least I've got a ballpark. Now call another guy and see where he comes in, and you start doing your averages and figuring out your values. So that's just the way I do it. Don't kill yourself too much on finding one comp, because it'll just slow you down. And then we already talked about that, but before contacting a source, make sure you have all the items that you really want to talk to them about so you don't have to call them back or get in that awkward scenario. So, okay, let's jump on. Dealing with appraising unfamiliar equipment. So just different things, and kind of wanted to open it up. This is a CAT 789D. I always wanted to go see this. Unfortunately, this is a desktop scenario, but I would have loved to have climbed on this thing. So these are pretty cool machines. This next slide is one of the largest machines in the world. Price is going to go up. You're not going to charge them, you know, a one item price for something like that. Figure out what you need to make, how much time. You're going to spend a lot of time talking to people trying to figure out something like that possibly. So there's a lot of components, But don't shy away from it. You just figure out what you need to make on it and charge them for it. Just ask the questions and visit with them. In some cases, some of those crazy big equipment, they're actually easier because, like you said, who's going to challenge you? What did the thing cost to make? There's no comps, so you're not going to find any comps. You're going to do a cost approach. So it's really just math at that point and figuring out what it's worth if it's running and, you know, get some details on it. But it's not that complicated. Sometimes we overthink it. This next slide just showed some printing presses. I've got a Man Roland printing press. So I was curious, what's the strangest or most complicated piece of equipment you've ever appraised? Anybody? Anybody had anything like? It can. Yeah. Anybody have anything that really they found super difficult or challenging or exciting? Probably most of our jobs are typical machine shops or pretty simple stuff. But I think the strangest one I ever did was bullets. They wanted the bullets appraised. Like, yeah, we could do. I was working with John on that one. We can appraise bullets. So, Nathan.
I did the shell of the Mars rover,
Really?
and I did the International Space Station.
Whatever. How'd you value that?
I did the International.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was hoping for the on-site. I actually did the printers that are on here.
Okay. Awesome.
And I actually have a 3D printed item that came from, it was printed up there and brought back.
Yeah. That's awesome.
My strangest was less exciting than that, but it was a appraisal of an equipment fleet in Peru, kind of in the middle at a gas distribution station in the middle of the Amazon.
Oh my goodness.
Cleared out, and we got stuck and stranded on the far end one time in a rainstorm, which means the Jeep just slides off the road. Craziest sounds you've ever heard.
Yeah. That's awesome. There's all kinds of things. To me, I say have fun with it. You know, if you get something that's challenging, it's just out of the ordinary. So, and it's just one more thing you can add to the things that you've done that now you're an expert in. And you can have fun with it. Seeing different types of equipment, especially if you get to go on site, it can be enjoyable. Now, sometimes it's boring because it's the same machine shop stuff you've done before, but other times it's exciting. Watch out for plastic extrusion. That's right.
You know,
So,
I've not done anything unique or strange, but one of my favorites is, and this always throws the client off, is letting them know that it's got negative on it.
mm,
Because it costs you more to get it out of here.
that's yeah.
I hate to hear that,
Yep.
but it's an interesting part of the business.
Yeah.
I did one time. It was an aluminum press. It was a 9,000 ton press. Only one in America, and the price was fair market value removed. And I came in at negative 1.5 million. And they went all the way to the district attorney of Colorado to verify. It stuck.
Yeah, that's true. So we have to be careful because those scenarios happen, and we have to think. So again, goes back to what's the point of this appraisal? Why is it happening? Because fair market value and continued use got tons of value. Fair market value, it could be worth nothing because that's, again, we're going to be removing it from the situation. So
My business model's a little different. I do the appraisals to mostly lead me into a project of handling everything for the bank, storing it,
Gotcha.
refurbishing it, or marketing it. And just about every project I have stuff that has a negative value that I said you just need to sell it on site for scrap and just stay out of it.
yeah,
I just stay out of it.
yeah, that's true. So there's lots of scenarios. Everything's different. But I kind of like that with the equipment side. Every job is different. And you're always meeting new people. You're always seeing different types of equipment. So I say have fun with it. Be the expert. And so here's kind of a scenario with appraising unfamiliar equipment. Even though you may not know anything about the equipment, display confidence that you're the right person to get it done. That doesn't mean feign that you know everything about the equipment, but be the expert in finding the value. Reassure them that, you know, I can find the value. I can do this job for you. We're going to do it right, and go through all our scenarios and help them to figure out what value type they need, walk them through the process, and just reassures them that you're the guy that can get this done for them. You can find the value for this piece of equipment, even though you know nothing about it. Nathan?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you kudos. I mean, you did this exact process when we were on the nuclear power plant.
Mm-hmm.
The exact process of you don't know it. I mean, you didn't know it. I
Yeah. And funny enough, that was a huge job, and it wound up being one of our easier jobs, you know, and they never questioned anything. I forget, I don't know if they were doing that for internal accounting or if it was buy sell, but they got everything, they were happy with it. We got our money, we moved on. I mean, we never heard it. So, like in every scenario, sometimes it's your smaller clients that are your biggest pain. You know, the ones that pay you the most money, sometimes you never hear from them. They're fine, you know, they just move on, but you never know. So this was a case of small aircraft I kept in here. So this was, I had never done an airplane before, and so I got contacted, you know, to do this aircraft. On the one hand, I felt completely inept, and I've heard other people say, stay away from aircraft. So I actually tried to stay away from it at first because I was just nervous, and I thought, this is one item I don't want to get into. Aircraft is a whole different ball game. But it's the same principles that apply. And so, you know, at first I told him, I said, look, I'm going to be upfront with you. I've never appraised aircraft before. So I wasn't going to try and sell them on something because I knew it was also a litigation thing. So let me throw that in there. Why I'm a little more hesitant, because I'm going to have to sit up on stand possibly and defend my value of something that I have never done anything with this before. It's not machine shop equipment. It's not a printing press. So, and with it being litigation, so anyway, we went back and forth. Well, they came back, they said, look, we want you to do it. You're a certified appraiser. I said, fine. I just wanted to be upfront with you that, you know, I'm going to do the legwork and I'm going to do a good job for you. It's just this is my first time having appraised an aircraft. So what I did, I used resources within our own organization to get it. So I charged them way more than I would have normally for one item. I mean, technically it's one item, but it's a complicated piece of an item. And I don't know if anybody in here is a pilot or has worked on aircraft before, but there's a whole lot more to aircraft and regulations and all kinds of things that go into it that affect the value drastically. Your propeller, you know, your hours, you know, all kinds of things have these huge swings in value. So that was all stuff I kind of had to learn because I didn't know anything about it. So I knew it was going to take me a lot of time. I also knew that since they were hiring me, I wanted to hire somebody who actually worked on aircraft and have them help me with it. So I went out and I got, one was in our organization, Stacy Heavley. He's out in California. He works on aircraft. He's an aircraft mechanic. They have their own crop dusting company. They build custom choppers. I mean, you know, this guy knows aircraft. He's been doing it his whole life. It's in his family. His dad did it and is a pilot, and he's within our organization. So I said, Stacy, I need to hire you. And I sent him all the data, and he did his own appraisal. He put together an appraisal report and sent it to me. And I also went to another company I found online. They weren't in our organization, but they're an aircraft appraisal company. I said, great. So I called them up. They had a sheet that they sent to me to collect all the data that I needed to give to them so they could appraise it. So I printed off that sheet. I took it to the husband, and I said, all right, here's all the information I need. So we went to the aircraft, and I asked him all the questions. He was a real jerk, by the way, but I got the data, and I had everything, and it made me look a little more professional because he was right off the bat, you know, throwing stuff at me. He goes, have you ever, you know, worked on aircraft before? Are you an aircraft mechanic? Are you a pilot? No. You have no business appraising this. I was like, whatever. You know, the court ordered it, so I said, you can say what you want. We just got to get this done. So, you know, we had a good conversation. Eventually, he loosened up, and I was able to get some information out of him. But I went down that list and got all the data that I needed. Then I sent that data off to this company that appraises aircraft, and they spit me back a value. And then I did my own research. You know, I found my comps and tried to match up the hours and all kinds of information. So in this scenario, even though I knew nothing about it, I became the expert, I felt, in this scenario. And so it did go to court, wound up having to defend it, but everything went fine. I mean, I got on the stand and they ripped me apart, but that's typical for litigation. They're going to try and make you look like an idiot, but at the end of the day, it always makes me laugh. You see these attorneys afterward, they don't care. They could care less, so you can't take it personal. You know, they're just you know, it doesn't matter. So it's kind of just a fun game for them in a lot of cases. Their clients' emotions are involved, but they don't care. So I don't take it personal. They ripped me apart. The client came up with his own appraisal report, which actually worked in my favor because he's the husband. Well, there's nothing unbiased about his report. It was completely biased. He took my report because he was able to get a copy of it. He basically copied it, changed the value, and spit it out as, you know, his appraisal report. So the judge obviously looked at that and said, this is ridiculous, you know, and so the side that we were working for, even though we're unbiased, it's still nice when our side wins. And so in that case, they did. They won the case, and everything went pretty good. But had I not gone to those extents when I was on the stand, we're just about out of time, but when I was on the stand, they were attacking my credentials because I hadn't done this. And I told them right there, I said, look, I was up front with you at the beginning that I hadn't done this before, but I said I was going to do the research, and here's what I did. So I told them about those scenarios, who I hired. And I put that in my report. So the report was huge because it had my research, and then it had these other 2 appraisal reports attached on as an addenda to mine. So it was this 100-page report that I gave to them that had all of this data. And it was, at that point, kind of irrefutable because it wasn't just me. It was basically 3 appraisal reports packaged in one. I kind of found an average in between all the different values and went with that. But they attacked me pretty good on it. And, you know, so there was different things that I shared with them, you know, some things that, because a judge doesn't know necessarily the difference on some of this equipment. And so when they say, well, you're not an aircraft mechanic or you're not certified in this or that, you know, as one example, I said, well, I'm not a farmer either, but I know how to find the value on a piece of farm machinery. You know, I've never welded before in my life. I would like to, but that doesn't mean I can't find the value, you know, on a welding machine. Or a doctor. Think about a doctor. A doctor doesn't necessarily have a clue how to build a cell salvage machine, but he's going to use it and save somebody's life. He may not have a clue how that heart works that he's going to put in somebody, but you know, he can work on it. So we don't have to be certified in every single piece of equipment. We're certified to find values. We know how to talk to the people. We know how to get information out of people. So that's all we're saying. Just be the expert. As it mentions here, know how to play dumb when you need to. Sometimes I play dumb when I'm trying to get comps, because I'm just honest with them. I say, look, I'm just here. I'm working with the bank or whatever. I don't know anything about this equipment. Can you help me out? And then sometimes they're more apt to give you more details, and they'll just feed you more information, because that's the truth. I don't really know anything about it. Give me as much details as you can on values and what you're selling this for. But then also at the same time, be the expert when you need to. When you're on stand or when you're in front of your client, present yourself as the expert with the data that you have. And then know when to stretch your comfort zone. So just like this with an aircraft or any assignment that comes up, don't be afraid to accept it. Be honest about what you can and can't do or what experience you have, but also lean on this organization. I've done that a lot and called on guys and gotten their help. John has been a huge help in giving me information on equipment that I'm completely unfamiliar with. So sometimes you can even sell it and then get one of your other CMEAs to help you do the report and pay them something. Everybody wins, and it gives you experience in that too. Don't be afraid to stretch your comfort zone is all that is. So I think we're out of time, but just this last slide was defending your appraisal. Be willing to and ready to defend your qualifications. So if you do get litigation, there's some guys that won't do litigation jobs, which is fine. You got to decide if that's something for you or not. I don't shy away from them. I like to charge more for them because I know it's going to be a pain, you know, on the front end. Sometimes I'm dealing with, you know, husbands and wives who hate each other, and you've got awkward on-site scenarios, and you know they're going to be ripping apart your values. So you're going to be spending way more time on that than you might on just the bank job, you know, for a buy-sell scenario. You got to make sure everything's in line. That think about what are they going to ask you, what items are they going to attack, and you've got to have all your research. So I charge more for litigation jobs. I charge what I want to make on it, and if I don't get it, I don't care because I know it's going to be a difficult situation. But when you get on stand, don't be afraid. Just defend your qualifications, your credentials, your field of expertise, as we talked about. Just tell them we have our certifications, so that's all we need to say. Once we're sworn in as an expert, you know, they can say whatever they want. In fact, one case that I had in Chicago, they were attacking me pretty heavily, and I was answering their questions, but man, they were just ripping me apart, and you can't do this, and you don't qualify, and you're not an expert in this, and the judge stopped them. The judge says, whoa, 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 whoa. Did you not already agree that he was an expert in this field? And the client, yeah, the attorney did. He said, then we're done here. We've qualified him as an expert witness, so let's move on. So it shut the thing down. So where I was super nervous and kind of getting backed in the corner, sometimes we have to look, you know, like a third party outside the box and realize that it's not that big a deal. We just defend our value. If we did our research, at the end of the day, it's an opinion of value. That's what our report says. It's an opinion of value, and it's supposed to be used as negotiations. So that says that in our report, that this value is to be used to negotiate, to find a value. So especially in those situations with litigation, that's what we can fall back on. This was my opinion. If you think it's different, that's fine. Could I be wrong? Sure I could. I'm not perfect, you know, but I think this is right, and here's my research to prove why I came up with this value. At the end of the day, we collect our money and get out of there. We never see the people again. So don't be afraid to do litigation. That's it. So we'll stop there. Right on time.